Working for a company is not the only option out there. What if you want to take control of your own hours and want to have more flexible schedule for yourself? Freelancing is one of the options that we have here, for which we are joined by Stefan Oprisan, former environment artist and material artist, now switching to full-time freelancing, with experience working on games such as Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, F1 Manager 22, Elite Dangerous, and a couple of other games. Stefan will take us through his personal experience working on going freelance and will be sharing some tips on how to do so yourself. So, welcome Stefan to Beyond Extend.
For the session tonight, we're going to do a basic introduction about who I am, why I went into freelance, how did I go about it, why I think networking is really key, the pros and cons of what I've learned for the past year, how to be financially independent, important things to consider that I have learned and I've seen from other individuals, stuff, and then finally we'll do a questions. Cool, so I'm Stefan. I've been in the industry for over 8 years in video games production. Half of that time was mentoring at Think Tank, and I forgot to type in Vertex as well there. But alongside that as well, I've done various different workshops with other schools as well. For the past 5 years in the industry, I've worked as a material artist. As we were saying before, I worked at Frontier on Planet Zoo, 3 DLCs for that. F1 Manager 2021 was called at the time, but that was when COVID happened, so they pushed it to 22. And then finally, 3 years on Avatar. Some of the recent clients that I've worked on mostly was Brushfire for the past year on my freelance time, and a couple of smaller ones in between. That's that. Okay, so freelancing, when you hear someone go freelancing, it's typically, either they've been let off or they just decided to go and do it. So in my case, the reason why I went freelance was because Avatar had just shipped. Like, I've shipped the biggest title up to my career up to that point, and I was kind of ready for something different, a new challenge. And as I mentioned, I've been mentoring for a good couple of years at that point, and the new term was starting, and I kind of handed my notice in just in time with the terms to start, basically. So I had all my students lined up. I had a client ready to go, which I was already sort of working with them in the meantime, building that relationship. So I said to him, look, I'm going to freelance. I can do more time on this. I can spend more time with you, working with what you're doing. And from there on, we just went with that, basically. And alongside that, the first few weeks, or to be fair, for the first few months, it massively improved the work-life balance. Like before, I would work at my job and then I would do whatever I could in the evenings. So it was a lot of, extra time spent. But now, because I was able to balance that work with my personal life a little bit as well, I just had way more flexibility. So that was a huge take on from working in the office. So as I said, I took more students as well, which obviously helped with the income as well, but also just generally how much more I could do with the actual mentoring as well. Just helping more students was something I was keen to get stuck in more. And of course, with that, I spend more time on personal projects. So in between classes, in between the mentoring schools, I had bits of spare time that I could just do whatever I wanted. So in that time, I would either just learn something new, work on my own stuff, and just generally again have that work-life balance. So how did I go about doing it? So like I said before, I already had an existing client. I had built that relationship with them in the past. I think because of the background that I had in building marketplace content, it kind of aligned with what they were looking for in terms of somebody to come in and help them. So it kind of helped remove those questions of who should I hire? Is this the right individual? And I think having that background of experience really helped me secure that. And it was really great. And again, the mentoring was about for 2 days a week, 2 days for the client. And then finally, I had an extra day to either focus on personal work or just on the overall balance. So if I just wanted to go out and go hiking, go do some scanning, go do some reference capture, I could do that as well in a weekday. Beforehand, I would have to physically take time in the weekend and then work around that, which was a lot more difficult. So all in all, I think it definitely gave me a much more clear balance, and overall it worked really well financially. So on to the next point, why I think networking is key. Your online presence is going to be your main brand of how you carry yourself. So anything that you post on your ArtStation, anything that you post on your LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, any type of social media is going to affect how you're perceived as an individual. So I'm someone who just doesn't do any of that. I only really post when it comes to, retweeting some work that I've seen, saving some stuff that you can do on X, where you can, if someone's saved or shared something, they can see that. And obviously just posting the work itself. I wouldn't try and interact with any discussions online, because for a fact, that kind of stuff can always come back in some way, potentially negatively, to affect you. And when you have kind of stuff online posted, you might not think that, oh, no one's going to really check that. I will guarantee you that a recruiter or some sort of HR individual from a fair, whatever company you might be applying in the future, they will check out who you are. Like, I've seen stories where individuals, would be very different how they are in the workplace to how they portray themselves on social media, and you kind of wouldn't think they're the same individual, and that can work negatively against you, because you suddenly sort of work at XYZ and you start saying all these things. It's not a good look. Okay, so I would try and stay away from anything when it comes to anything in the media or anything like that. If you want to do just general game dev talk, by all means go for it, because I think that's a bit more within the industry of what you can discuss. So I think that's kind of more relevant to what you're discussing. I think it's a bit more relative to what's your job title. So onto that, I think LinkedIn, it's something that actually a lot of students don't utilize, or they just don't see the benefit. Even some people that I've heard that are in the industry, they just don't use it. And I think that's such a missed opportunity as a way to expand your influence of who you are. Even if you're not looking to work anywhere else or apply for any future jobs, just trying to interact a little bit more, even just finding some stuff, liking, commenting here and there, can really help expand your reach, basically. And I think with that in mind, especially at a stage when you're ready to start applying anywhere, the more you connect with people, the more likely you're going to see their traffic. If they like something, you'll typically see somebody, commenting for, what's it called? So that extends the visibility onto their site or onto their profile, and that can help reach you, basically. So I think that's a really good way to expand where you can expand your presence, basically. So I think, try and have a solid portfolio on LinkedIn, your about section, your education, your experience, a solid profile picture that's, just clear about who you are as an individual. You can also get the verified tick with the workplace email, which me and Timothy have. So you normally just do that through your workplace email. I think some you can do it through your ID verification as well. But I know some people can be quite iffy about that, posting like passport or driving picture. You don't know where that's going to end up on their database. So if you can do it with just an email, then do so, because that's going to be the best way to get verified. And I think it's just a good way, I think, for recruiters to see that you've got almost like a verified presence. You're not just like a lurker type person. And I think staying in touch with past clients that you've worked with, whether that's freelance or not, or even just potential places that you've worked at, it's always good to keep that open door to some capacity, because you never know when you might be looking to freelance, or the unfortunate happened and you've been let go. Keeping that friendly connection with the recruiter, or even just people that you've worked with in the past, it's a really good way to just stay active and just to keep engaging on potential ways for networking. Because if you've had a really good solid relationship with that person, they're more likely to remember you, which is great, but they're also more likely to, in a way, pull you onto I've worked with this person, almost like a referral process, right? I've worked with this person before, they're great, they're a solid worker, let's give them an interview. So you'll be able to get filtered a lot better. Okay. And finally, be proactive. Don't be afraid of the word no. Just because you've applied for somewhere and they've said no, sorry, Stefan, we're not looking for anyone right now, doesn't mean that it's not going to be a no in the future. So hopefully they would have given you some feedback to work from. If not, just keep doing what you're doing, keep pushing through, and then hopefully the next time you apply there, you'd have applied with better work that you think, yeah, we can definitely see you've improved. So I think in the capacity of a freelance, if you've worked with the client in the past and you've decided to part ways for whatever reason, they might get back in touch with you and say, hey Stefan, we've got some work coming up, would you be interested, because I know you've done some work for us. And that's how I got the freelance gig for Ballistic Moon. One of the directors reached out a couple of years ago when I was working, and I said no at the time, look, I wasn't interested, but let's keep in touch. Okay, you never know when something might change. And then after I went freelance, I made a big thing on LinkedIn saying, look, if anyone's interested, this is my work, hit me up. And then, he reached out saying, look, we need some work on materials. Would you be interested for a couple of weeks? So that's how you basically go about it, keeping those connections alive and being proactive. Okay, so let's move on to some of the pros of being freelance. So like I said, it's going to very much depend on the individual. So again, this is my experience. Somebody else might come and say something completely different, but I think that's the beauty of it. Everyone's going to have a slightly different experience of how it works. But the main things for me was the better work-life balance. The fact that I could do some teaching in the day, have a bit of a break, have some teaching in the afternoon, and then just chill in the evening. It was great. I had so much flexibility for just doing more of my own stuff, spending more time with my wife, my dog, and so forth. And it was actually, less work for equally, if not more income. So because of the work that I was doing, I was only really doing 3-4 days of actual work, and that matched pretty much 5 days of full studio lifestyle. So you can see why that would be such a huge pro in that respect. And that extra day, that could be Wednesday or Friday or Monday. For me, it could be a long weekend, right? So, but in that case, I would use that opportunity, and I would encourage you to use that opportunity to keep pushing through, work on something else that's going to potentially bring you more skill set or more income. Okay, and that allowed me to focus on more personal project. So if you know me at all, you'll know that I have my own marketplace set up on Fab and on ArtStation and all of that. So a lot of the stuff that I'll do in my personal time would be built specifically for that, which is onto the topic of personal development and learning. So I'll try and experiment with some UE5 stuff, try some designer stuff, try and find something different that I can learn in a time frame. Because I had actual time to experiment, I could do something different as opposed to I've only got an evening to work on something. I can't really dedicate a lot of time because I'm tired, I've got to take the dog out, I've got to make dinner. So that allowed me to really sort of build a bigger plan onto what I can do in that time space. And yeah, every day was different. So one day, Monday, I would do mostly teaching. Tuesday, Wednesday, I could do freelance for somebody. Thursday again teaching, and then Friday I could just chill out or focus on personal work. Now onto the cons. So as we all know, freelancing is pretty much a roller coaster. It goes up and down. So you'll have, like I was saying with Timothy in the beginning, before the call, you'll have some really, really busy months or a few busy weeks, and then suddenly you've got nothing at all. Okay, so you've got to find yourself ways to keep that momentum going, keeping those connections, reaching out to people, even just sending speculative applications, sending those emails that you've previously worked with these individuals to make sure that, if you need any help, I've got time to assist. And don't be afraid, like I said, if they say no, to just keep trying, because eventually they'll just memorize you. I know that Stefan's, we're not looking for anything right now, but hey, we might have something in the next couple of months. And actually, on LinkedIn now for the past couple of weeks, because I've got around 3,000 connections. I constantly see people asking for, I'm looking for this freelancer, I'm looking for this person in this type of field. Anyone knows this? I'm doing this kind of freelance gig. Anyone interested? And there's a lot of opportunities in that respect. So I think having that kind of connection is really, really important. Obviously, the income can't be guaranteed because you might not be working. So you have to find something to keep yourself occupied. So even though you might not have any actual work itself that will pay your bills, still try and work on something, build a skill set, move into a slightly different field of work that you can broaden your skill set. And obviously the competition is steep, in which goes into the point, or the fourth point, your daily hourly rate could be your Achilles heel. If you're competing with somebody else from a different part of the world, Eastern Europe, Asia, which the cost of living is a lot cheaper, but they can do just as good work as you. From a business point of view, why would they go for you, somebody who's in Western Europe, charging this much versus somebody else? So you've got to be realistic in what you can charge. I'm not saying, don't charge your worth, because I think that's really, really important, but be realistic in order to try and get some work at least. Like, you can definitely find a bit of a balance. So I think there's a point in these next slides where, if you can find a client that says, look, Stefan, we're doing work for like 3 to 6 months, then you can say to them, look, that's fine. I can discount a little bit to guarantee that work, because that will also help me. It will help you as well, save a bit of money. So it works for both parties. So think of that kind of aspect of potentially securing more work, because the more security you have, the more income you have. And finally, the one negative thing with freelancing is that even though you're freelancing and you've signed an NDA as you normally work in the office, you can't share anything. I think sometimes it's even stricter with freelancers because of the way we work. It's out of their control of what they can balance, or should I say secure, in terms of what goes out there. So you, more often than not, you can't really talk about anything for the next period of time. So a lot of outsourced studios who hire freelancers, they'll not post their work that they've done for that project a couple of years potentially after the game has shipped. That's just part of the contract. So the only way you should really manage that is by continuing to build your portfolio. If you have to work for the next 6 months, working on some extra work, then do so, because it's going to be really valuable. It's going to show an employer or your next client that you're still doing something. You can tell them, oh, I was working at XYZ on NDA. Yeah, that's great, but you can't tell them what it is. You can't show anything, and they can't always, I guess, trust you, if that makes sense, because it's your word against theirs. So they kind of have to go off your current work that you have. And if you've not updated your portfolio in the last year, then, or 2 years, or how long, then it's kind of difficult for you to sell yourself in that respect. So I really encourage just, sacrifice today for a better tomorrow, basically, I think is the quote. So if you have to work, a couple of evenings, a couple of weekends, then do so, because it's only going to be a benefit. Okay. Next slide, being financially independent. So we all have the portfolios that we have, which is going to give us the first job, or the first few jobs. So one thing that I really tell a lot of my students is, and to be fair, a lot of people, I'll tell them this, posting your stuff on the Unreal Marketplace, Flip Normal, ArtStation, Turbo Squid, all of these kind of things. It's a really good way to have a lot of, well, not a lot, but you start off having a bit of passive income, because it's going to reduce your need to actually have some guaranteed work. It's not a lot to start with, but if you build over time, it's going to potentially be like from 10% to 20% of passive income. And that's 20%, or 1/5 of you not having to work. That's basically like 1 day of the week you don't have to work. So it's not always guaranteed. Like, you'll have sometimes great months, sometimes you'll have crap months, but it's just how the roller coaster is, basically. So start putting yourself in this mindset that the work that you'll be doing, you'll potentially put on some sort of marketplace to sell. It might not sell, but the more you do it, the more traffic is going to build up. So thinking of the kind of stuff you want to do, sometimes you just do it purely out of passion, which is great. You want to focus on a particular skill set, that's fine. But also think along the lines of, okay, I want to build something in the style of Skyrim, The Last of Us, Uncharted, whatever it might be, to put on a particular marketplace to build more of that income. And think of this long term, okay? Build a little plan so you can focus on that, on what you'll be working with. So thinking long term is, making sure that if you've got a really, really good gig going on that pays well, think that it's not going to be forever. You might have a fantastic 6 months of that pays well, and then you have nothing. So you have to find ways to keep yourself occupied. So if you've got a really good month, save more than you really think you'll need some, because you'll have a lot of time when you won't be working. And what's the other point I was going to say? Yeah, you just won't be working, basically, is the main topic. So you have to find ways to pay your bills and to have money for the tax, basically, for the tax man. So that's really and you might have savings when you work in the office for an actual job. you're mostly just going to use your salary to pay bills because you're already taxed, right? Which you don't see that. But when you're freelancing, you have to think of those at the same time. So that's an extra expense that you've got to think about of how much you charge, how much you can work for, so you can keep a reserve amount. Typically, people say have at least 3 to 6 months, which I think is it's a good way. That's what I've tried to have myself, and it seems to work fairly well. But I can guarantee you that it goes away just like that, within a flick of a switch. So in today's world, depending where you are, especially in Western Europe or US, the cost of living is pretty high. So it's all relative, where you are in the world and how much you charge versus your cost of living. But in my case, it's fairly high. So, I charge a certain amount to balance that. And then no one is investing in your pension except you, obviously. In the UK, you do get, I think, 25% government tax, government pension contribution, which is great. But it's nowhere near what you typically have if you worked at an actual place. Like, I've known some studios where they easily do like over 10% of your salary. So you could only put in 5, which is, to be fair, quite a high amount, and then they'll put in 10%. That's 15% of your salary is going in there. So realistically, you'd have to be earning quite a decent amount to be able to put away in taxes and put away in savings as well. But to note is that if you are I don't know how it is in some countries, but in the UK, what you put in your pension would deduct from some of your tax. So, think of that as well. Don't just save that money, just sit there, use some of that as well to offset the tax, which is great, which is really, really good. And then finally, the expenses. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with expenses, so all your software, all your traveling, if you go for any reference capturing trips like that, paying for fuel as well, it's something that you can expense that will help you use that final bill. Okay, so some of the important things to consider that I've learned through the past year I've heard from colleagues and just generally what I've picked up over the last 8 years. So very important in any freelance gig, don't agree to any work without a contract. I think that goes without saying, making sure that you've got a piece of paper that says, this is what we're going to pay you, this is what we've agreed to do, and it's signed both parties. So, I've heard so many, stories of, I've seen on LinkedIn, heard from friends, this person's not paid me, I've not been paid in 3 to 6 months, they've said I've not delivered this, I've delivered it, and it's just a mishmash of people fighting on this. And this goes on to the second point, which was having a statement of work, which is a list of deliverables that both parties agree to deliver, or what they want and what you deliver. So ensuring that you have that physically written down. Stefan, you're going to deliver us 15 materials in full PBR in the next, 6 weeks. And then, as long as you're realistic on that time frame and on the cost, then, go with that. But as long as you've got that on paper, everyone shouldn't really complain. You've delivered that, they're happy, you made some adjustments, but then it's all signed off. Thinking about passive income. So like I said before, try and think of other ways to get some of that income, putting your stuff on marketplaces, putting some designer files here, some alphas here, it all adds up. And the more you do it, the more you'll build traffic and the more you'll bring traffic to your name and your brand. Well, so you know what they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. So start doing that now. Okay. Put aside income for a rainy day. You'll never know when you will get ill, when you'll potentially finish that gig, and you will never know when you'll have the next one. Okay, so having some of that money to keep you going is definitely really important. I use a software called QuickBooks, which tracks all of my income and I can mark as expenses. So it links to my bank account, and anything that comes in there, as a financial amount, I can say, yeah, this is income, yeah, this is expense, yeah, this is personal. So this is a great way to keep the receipts, and it keeps it all organized for you for when you submit your tax. So I've actually got an accountant, and I've got his email linked in there, so you can see exactly what I've got in terms of income and expenses, that he can just quickly do his job without any fuss. I used to send him receipt pictures and just random screenshots of what I've earned, and it was just a nightmare to manage. So having a software, even Excel as well, that you can clearly see, okay, this is how much I've earned this month, this is why it's an expense, because with Excel as well, you can use different formulas to see exactly where the highs and lows are, how much your expenses are, where you've really had the best income, which months they are, and it will just give you a bit of a better idea where you'll potentially be more busy that time of the year. So that's a good way to go about it. Pricing your worth, but I think being realistic as well, because it's happened to me as well where I've had potential work where I've told them my daily rate and they said, yeah, that's great, and then I've not heard from them. So that's potentially where I maybe oversold myself in what I thought was realistic, and they've maybe found somebody else who can just do it just as well but a little bit cheaper. From a business perspective, it makes perfect sense to do that, but I think it's something to keep in mind where if you're not really getting anywhere with these clients, are you maybe charging a little bit too much? No, maybe bring it down just to see if that will improve things. And you can use various calculators that are available online to find what your daily rate is. One of the good rule of thumbs is to find your local tradesman and see how much they charge, like a builder, plumber, electrician, etc., and see how much they charge to get a slightly better idea. But there's a lot of game dev calculators and freelance things online. I think there's a couple in Dynasty, a couple of in EXP, just pinned in different channels that you can use. And that will give you a good idea of how much your bills are, how much your insurance is, fuel, licenses, all that kind of stuff. How much you want to put away in pension, and that will give you a good overview of what you should be charging, including as well the reserve money that you need for enjoying yourself, living life, but also taxes and rainy day money. And consider other production disciplines. So like I was saying before, I've seen so many stuff now on LinkedIn where it's outside of the direct environment art stuff. So stuff for like 2D, animation, architecture, VFX, product design. I think those are really important avenues that I think you should start considering to slowly move into, of ways to find new work, but also equally push your skills in a slightly different direction. You start an evening here, do a project here, and then slowly post your first thing on ArtStation, on LinkedIn, and you'll build a bit of traffic, okay? And then finally, with this in mind, your reputation is the most important thing, one of the most important things. As we were saying before even the course started, word of mouth travels very quickly. Like if you know XYZ from Playground Games or Frontier, and they'll say, oh yeah, I know Timothy, I've worked with him, he was great. We're actually looking for a environment artist. We should reach out, or we're looking for a freelancer. Let's message Stefan because he's doing materials. Let's see if he wants some work. So, you can basically jump the queue ahead of anyone that's applied through direct channels. So definitely start doing that. Connect with people, get active in game dev communities, Dynasty, Beyond Extent, the club, EXP. All of these are great ways to get your brand and your name out there. Maybe you're not doing it directly just for that, but just start building those connections, build a bit of a friendship with these people. And that's how I actually got a lot of the gigs that I'm doing now. It's just purely word of mouth. So yeah, basically the same point. Building connections in those communities is so important because you never know when you'll need some potential help, or even just for a social thing, like you can crash Timothy's Beyond Extent thing, and you can meet some new people, meet some cool people, and just make friends. And that's how you can end up doing a workshop here, a talk here, some gigs here. Yeah, really recommend it. Learning and sharing, which will obviously bring more traffic. So a lot of stuff on Twitter and LinkedIn, when you share various different tips, different workflows that you've learned, just again, bringing more traffic. And it's just generally just being someone who can help somebody else. Maybe you're not directly looking for some sort of anything out of it. You're just doing it out of being a good Samaritan, right? So that's always great to see. And then finally, consider mentoring, tutorials, and potential workshops, even if it's doing it off your own back, right? You build 1 or 2 YouTube videos here, a tutorial here. It might not be the best thing in the world. You might have, not the best mic, but again, Rome wasn't built in a day. And that's how these, the big studios and the big brands they know nowadays, that's how they started. That's how they got to the last couple of years. And that's basically it. So hopefully that was something that was insightful and different. If you have any questions that you want to reach out outside of this talk, you've got my LinkedIn there, and you've got my R station at the bottom in case you want to check me out or just message me for anything there.
Hi everyone, Timothy Dries here, the founder of Beyond Extend. I just want to thank Stefan for coming on and sharing all these tips with us on his personal learnings from his year of freelance. And I wish you all the best, man. I hope you have a lot of financial success. At Beyond Extend, we want to help you take things to the next level yourself, for which we have a lot of exclusive contents such as weekly work reviews, more workshops, and our Environment Artist Handbook, just to name a few. All available to you if you become a community member. So, with that said, stay creative and thank you so much for your support.